Hello, K-5 teachers. This is Sean Neely, the pre-K through 12 humanities lead, uh, presenting you some social studies professional learning linked to other professional learning activities happening in Cedar Rapids Community School District this week, also at a safe social distance. This screencast should give you an overview of the social studies lens on professional learning that happened earlier this week and guide you through the independent or PLC collaborative unit planning time that you're to embark on for your June 4th professional learning. Although I suppose it's possible some buildings are doing that on June 5th. But this should get you started and give you confidence to do some planning around social studies instruction that may take place in person in the fall or perhaps also at a distance. The objectives for today are to really kind of give you just some quick updates on where social studies curriculum instruction is going. We launched K-5 social studies units of study this year, and then the year got canceled, kind of. So school year 2020-21 is going to be the first time we have extensive use and practice with the units of study. So unfortunately, this aspect is kind of a do-over. We're also going to try to make some explicit connections between the things that you're picking up from the June 3rd professional learning cycles on things like direct instruction and communicating clear learning targets, and then also assessment for learning. I put this all under this instructional cycle thing. I think it's the best way to bind it all together. So you'll see that come up through the presentation quite a bit. And then again, it's about you being empowered and able to use the resources we provided and plan for learning in person or distance learning, over the time allotted to you. That gift of time is going to be huge. So by the end of this session, for the screencast, but also the huge block of work time that you're supposed to be entitled to do some planning, many may put that in emphasis in a different subject, but some people might want to just figure out new social studies. We should be thinking about the instructional cycle and then whatever module you focused upon for June 3rd, whether it was providing and communicating clear learning goals, direct instruction, or assessment for learning, you should be able to employ those tools and that thinking to your planning and then end up with a social studies unit or module of learning. We talk about line of learning a lot, but in social studies, I want you to really think of it as an instructional cycle of learning. And so this slide really gets into the details about summer work taking place for each grade. And because we have developed our units of study, and those are rooted in new Iowa Core Social Studies standards and really kind of emphasized via bundles of Cedar Rapids Community School District priority standards, we're really at the point where we're refining our units and making revisions to them. And so we sort of finished last summer realizing that while we didn't get enough time to really forcefully put a sensible and logical pathway to teach geography into our materials, so we're going to do that this summer. And our curriculum work starts on Monday, June 8th, and we should have it all wrapped up on June 12th. So there will be some slight changes to units over the summer, but not too much. Hey, look at that. One objective's done. Okay, so moving on to our focus on extending professional learning. This instructional cycle really kind of is the guide for certainly social studies. I think this is just good teaching, but we start always with that stuff at the top, the objectives, goals, and standards that have to drive the work. And our targeted instruction in those objectives, goals, and standards really has to use the language of the standard. So in social studies, we have sort of our teacher standards that are closest to the Iowa Core social studies standards, but we also have attempts at student-friendly language versions of those and I can statements. And there might be some tough vocabulary in there and things like that, but we actually have to teach that vocabulary that's tied to our standard. One exception, though, might be those kindergarten teachers who see deliberative discussion as something they have to teach. That might be a bridge too far, but it is kind of in the spirit of putting the language of the standard in front of students. And so as we go forward, we do some informed teaching, and we show students what it's like to learn within that standard, and we keep on finding ways to check for understanding via formative assessment. Sometimes it's a FISTA 5, it's maybe the traffic light of I really don't get this, I sort of get this, I'm green light, ready to go. But it might also be a more formal writing activity. And we take those writing samples and work products, and we analyze the data, and we figure out what is it our students need on this standard. Social studies standards are complex. They are spiraled throughout the year. They take many attempts to master. And in fact, once mastered, they could actually be forgotten with a period of dormancy. So a lot of the topics of the standards, or the skills embedded in the standards, we come back to from year to year. So this instructional cycle is going to pop up again. Okay, so looking at my clock that's running on this thing, I'm going to try and keep this to 15 minutes because that's all I'm allowed on the screencast software. But anyway, it's sensible to really kind of give you this overview and then get rolling. So we'll do the best we can, but I did want to point out that office hours are going to be held for grade bands for social studies at different times. And these links, which you have access to the slide deck and sort of this launch page that I believe Ryan Reedstrom has created. But if you were to get this slide deck open and go click on grades 2 and 3, because that's what you teach, and you do that at the right time, I'm going to be sitting at my computer and we can dialogue about the learning. But the June 3rd modules are around providing and communicating clear learning targets, assessment for learning, and direct instruction. So even though you might have only done one of those modules, I'm here to really kind of like glue it all together in the context of social studies. So that instructional cycle, when you load stuff over top of it, the providing and communicating clear learning targets is one of the first things we do. Once we know what we're going to teach and what our students need to know and be able to do, we first have to jump into getting, kids access to that from the very start. When I started teaching about 20 years ago, I knew what I wanted to teach, but then I usually did a bunch of stuff, and then I'd sort of check for understanding along the way, and that sounds good, but I kind of kept like the big goal for some reason, private and separate. In recent years, I was really good at putting that in front of students and putting them in the learning environment with a clear target from the very first moments we were doing things. The targeted instruction then that you all will plan, and it's kind of in the units of study. You can pull ideas from that. Usually starts with direct instruction that the teacher may lead or work with students on. But then there's that gradual release of responsibility, which I'll come back to again. But from there, we start to look at ways to find out how students are doing and check for understanding. That's our assessment for learning stuff. I could have put the assessment for learning box all over this diagram, but it does really exist in the center, because when we respond to data, that's going to be creating maybe new assessments and new ways for students to show their understanding. When we do informed teaching, what's informing our teaching? Probably the assessment results, even if it's those quick, informal ones. Okay, so I think we've maybe provided the context for social studies learning linked to June 3rd, so we can get into the guidance on planning lessons and units for K-5 social studies. And then, it's really up to you to think about the emphasis you're going to place on in-person or distance learning environments. Okay, so the very first thing we have to do is find our priority standards and learning targets. Now, I thought about linking them here, but then I realized people might be clicking into the screencast. And so since you're already going to have to go out and find this stuff, these are things that you'll find on Canvas. So the priority standards and learning targets are on a pretty well-organized Canvas page. I know a lot of teachers, and I know at the secondary level, they're kind of leaning towards Google Classroom, but Canvas is currently the house for all of our stuff, and all updates and documents are placed in there. Within those Canvas sites for each grade, once you've seen the priority standards and learning targets, you can then examine common assessment templates. I'd prefer you not use the ones formatted as quick check sheets, especially at the lower grades, because we're really kind of seeing how here we can plan for assessments and collecting data on student performance very early in the year, because we know we're going to come back to it later. So those assessment templates are meant to help students, maybe with a lot of modeling and scaffolding in their first use, practice in class and collaborative groups, but then eventual independent use. We want to put those assessment templates at the center of our work. For planning purposes and getting to know your social studies curriculum better, then we want to focus on a fall unit of study and have those contingencies, for maybe having students do some work at a distance. And then ultimately to create a cycle of instruction using a standard I suppose you could use more than one standard, but I think it's best just to keep it focused on one standard at the start. Using those templates and activities from the units of study, which are on Canvas as well. And those are pretty much all completed, again, subject to revision this summer. Okay, so moving from that last point about planning a cycle of instruction, using an assessment and all that stuff, the questions that should be, kind of at the front of your mind should be that how would this look in an in-person or distance learning environment? And because distance learning is kind of new for us, I think that's a question that's best discussed via PLCs. And I also like the idea of teachers kind of, collaborating as a PLC, and then maybe, one person on the team, leads kind of thinking about what that might look like in science, and another person on the team looks at what it might look like in social studies. But that's a great place to start. Well, next we want to go to, how do I get students to take the I can statement and make sense out of it? Again, the standards are rigorous and difficult, so what we want them to do is get practice with the standards language, but then if they don't, completely internalize it or get it, that's okay. We're going to keep coming back to it. But we want to build that cycle of instruction that starts from maybe teacher modeling to collaborative work, which I call the y'all do. If I were thinking of my Slovenian immigrant friends, they'd say use do, all right? Use plural, like in groups. And then eventually, and again, this might take place in March, April, May, the student can work and live in that standard alone. Okay, then the idea is, how do I take assessments for learning and build those in? And again, these can be informal, the tools that run across disciplines, like my traffic light example for different subjects works just great, but we also have those templates as well. So this is a slide to go for in your planning. If it seems very confusing, probably best to stop in those office hours. And so the guidance then really adheres to this instructional cycle model, and it's trying to bring the June 3rd things together. If you focused only on direct instruction for June 3rd, that's okay. I've tried to give you a context for providing the clear learning targets, and then assessment for learning as a conversation piece. You'll have a chance to access those modules anyway. Okay, so we're almost done here. The optional add-ons to planning that you might consider is there's a lot of emphasis on social emotional learning competencies released by the state of Iowa, and then our new social emotional learning curriculum resources. Social studies is social, and so we focus on everything that's happening in kids' brains internally. That's our psychology thing, how they interact with others around them and the various groups to which they belong. That's sociology. And then we spread that out into the ways that humans are sort of bound together in networks, and that's through our history, economics, geography, and things like that. So there's a lot of connections you can hit, especially at the early grades in social emotional learning competencies. And then for our various social studies texts that we've woven into the curriculum, third grade, for example, has a bunch of biographies for their second unit of study. Those were probably not used at all this year. Those interactive read aloud things can be really powerful for leveraging the literacy skills. We've also got social studies content embedded into Super Kids and Wonders, and there's some great tools in there you might consider. Okay, so coming to the end, I wish I could be with you in person, but the screencast is meant to give you sort of a jumping off point. If you had a question pop into your head, great chance for me to answer it is in my office hours. And so you can see the grade bands below. Again, if you have the slide deck and your time is up on June 4th, you can just click this link here and pop into my office hours. You can also get it from the website I think that this will be attached to. However you got to the screencast in the first place, there's probably a link to these slides right beneath it. In any case, I do hope to connect with you. I should be able to provide additional updates by the end of June about our curriculum changes. A lot of those documents will be finalized in August with the creations of teacher work teams. But I did want you to know that I really appreciate all the work you're doing to plan for this kind of crazy time. And I do hope to connect with you in person in the future. But in the meantime, I'll see you at office hours. But if you feel equipped to get out there and tackle this on your own, go for it. Thank you so much, and I'll wait to hear from you.